All right, good afternoon, everyone. We are in the home stretch and ready for an exciting conversation. Barbara did a wonderful job introducing you, Jim. I'm going to just take one more crack at it. Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to introduce, after 6.5 hours of discussion, the elephant in the room. So we're looking forward to a good discussion, but Jim and I have decided in advance if this doesn't go well, we're just going to ask them to play YMCA, and we're going to do some awkward
We'll
dance.
dance. Yeah, it'll be great.
Is good for everyone. Look, the best thing I can do in this conversation, Jim, is get out of the way and let you share your insights. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. It is the Thursday before the first Tuesday of November. Give us your current take on the state of the race.
So every night we do 66,000 simulations of the election, like a lot of you bankers in the room do, based on different scenarios. I got the morning numbers this morning. Of our 66,000 simulations, Christiana, we have Harris winning 50.1% of the time, and we have Trump winning 49.9% of the time. You know, they were talking about our previous speaker, Hans, being the most on message. I'm probably the most off message person, because I don't do this anymore and I don't care, and I can be honest. And, you know, I think the more interesting question, because I think polls suck, and I got in lots of trouble because I went on Fox News about a year ago and said that all pollsters should be shot. That was not the smartest thing I've ever done. That gets you two things. It gets you 4 nights on the couch from your wife, and it gets you a very stern lecture from Barack Obama about why. But if you look, we have 15 presidents and prime ministers around the world as our clients, and what you're seeing everywhere is the polls be drastically and dramatically off. So I don't care about what the polls say. What I do care is that as of this morning, 32 million Americans have already voted. And every night of those people, both parties run very sophisticated simulations of who we think those people are and what you can figure out what they're doing. And really, there's 2 main things that are driving American politics. The first is that 72% of Americans think the country is on the wrong track. No incumbent party in the history of the Republic has ever won a presidential election with that number being true. So you should assume, based on that statistic, that Donald Trump will win on Tuesday. You should also assume that he also has a 6-point lead on who's better on the economy. When I ran President Obama's campaign at 2 o'clock in the morning once a month, Bill Clinton would call my cell phone over and over and over until I picked it up, which was very annoying but also helpful, because Clinton would say all presidential elections around the world are always a referendum on the future. And that in all of our 15 countries we do business in, that has been true. If that is true, Kamala Harris will win this election, because she's laid out a very clear future and Trump just wants to make it about himself. And so you have these 2 things back and forth. But what can we glean from these 30-some million Americans who've already voted? 2 things. Republicans are doing much better in early voting than they did 4 years ago. There's reasons for this. Last time President Trump told his party not to early vote, which was stupid and not helpful to his own cause. He's figured that out. The second thing is women are voting in higher propensity than any of the polls expected. Since the abortion decision in the United States, polls have been off 5.5% in favor of Democratic candidates, because they missed the one thing that I've spent my entire 55 years on this planet attempting not to do, which is don't piss women off. And I've been very unsuccessful at that, but it is very true. And when you look at the early vote, women are voting in historic numbers. And if you're Kamala Harris, you sleep a little bit better thinking that as well.
Yep. My first question was designed to draw you out on the prediction. Now I want to get you on preparation. Because as you say, you do advise many governments around the world, equally many important corporations. Tell us, when you are in those conversations and in the boardrooms around the world, what are your stakeholders thinking about in terms of preparation? How are they looking at the differences, and how are they looking at the similarities in policy positions?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that are interesting. Right now, there's just kind of like high-grade panic about Donald Trump coming back. among my foreign clients, not all of them, but most of them. Not because they don't like him, it's just they don't understand the theory of the American case anymore. Like, would we actually walk away from NATO? Would we actually impose 60% tariffs? Would we actually pull aside trade deals? Three of the things that kind of got America to our preeminent economic situation. The thing I say to everyone is just take a deep breath, because 6 out of the last 7 American elections have been what we call change elections, meaning either the House, the Senate, or the White House flip. And so Americans desperately want one thing, and that is divided government. And it looks like, if you look at our simulations of the election, they're going to get it. We have the Senate flipping from Dems to Republicans. We have the House flipping from Republicans to Dems. And you all can drink some wine later and decide who's going to win the presidential. So it is that close. But what is true is we have divided government. That is, for my clients, for our companies that we deal with, in some ways very good, because it means you'd have to have bipartisanship. We have most of the Trump tax cuts expire at the end of next year. We have a fiscal situation that is getting out of hand. America has to make some very difficult decisions. And the best way, and historically the way we do that best, is with divided government. And so, while people are worried about Trump for a variety of reasons, the thought of having divided government calms them a bit.
So one of the observations I have from my vantage point in the US is that many of the folks I talk to, as they think about the prospects of a second Trump administration, are largely making the assumption that it's going to be similar to the first.
Yep.
Is that a good assumption, or do you think we ought to be prepared for some radically different directions?
My Democrats hate when I say this, but the truth is, Donald Trump's first term, he didn't do much. He didn't get much done. And in part because that was the chaos around it, in part because he was being impeached a couple times, in part because he went through 702 chiefs of staff and members of the cabinet and, all that. What is true is the second term will probably be less chaotic. The first time he didn't know what he was doing, and it's not his fault, he'd never been in any elected office. This time he will know exactly what he's doing. Last time he didn't expect to win, so they didn't do a transition. This time they have laid out the most comprehensive plan called Project 2025 I've ever seen in American politics. They know exactly what they're going to do. And so I believe him at his word. And he and I used to know each other when he was a Democrat. And I think he's going to do some of the things he promises he's going to do. I think our NATO friend previously was very political on this, but I think there's over a 50% chance we would start to unwind our NATO commitments, which I think is an absolute disaster. I think we would absolutely do tariffs. And there would be bipartisanship on that. Because if you think about the two things that both parties agree on right now in the United States, and you know this because you talk to your clients, it is the threat to China, threat from China is the #1 thing. And if he attempts to do tariffs on China, the Democrats will help him. So that will happen. So people on the market, I think, have underestimated that and are thinking that wiser heads are going to prevail. I think they're out of their minds. And the second thing that both parties agree on is the threat to big tech and AI. And I think there will be some bipartisanship, no matter who wins the presidency, trying to figure that out.
So let me stick with that for a minute. You've been in the room listening to our speakers throughout the day, and the themes that have come across very strongly have been about the risks of fragmentation, the challenges of European competitiveness. And I'm curious what some of your reactions have been to that, and how you think, respectively, the candidates would look upon the discussions that are happening here in the room today.
It is a really great question. I was just stunned by the quality of your speakers. And Christiana had to get a bunch of emails from me disagreeing with various speakers on points, but I've decided not to use this public thing to argue with a bunch of very smart people. But I think a couple things. I think it would make Americans very, very proud to know how much concern there is about the Inflation Reduction Act and how Europe's going to follow it. Because it was such a partisan thing, and Trump has pledged to get rid of it so quickly that I think that would be super interesting. I think there is a absolute divide in American politics that doesn't exist here on the way forward in Ukraine. And I think the Europeans have been so much stronger and more united than the United States and could learn from the discussions that we had here today. I think there's some similarities too. And people always think America is this weird thing over here that does crazy stuff. And in many ways, we're just following all of you. And what I mean by that is the number one issue in America right now is migration. This has been true with all of my campaigns around the world for the past 2 years. In fact, after a couple of campaigns in Europe last year, I went and met with President Biden and said, hey, incumbents are losing everywhere on migration. The Democratic Party's got to go to the center. And you've seen Harris lead in that. The second thing is, I think it's fair to say America has the best economy right now in the world. There's no voter who thinks that in the United States.
Right.
And that is true in Europe too. It doesn't matter how good the leaders are, incumbents are losing all over the place because there aren't answers to some of these really difficult questions of migration, of AI, of job loss. In America, this is the first generation in the history of the United States in 250 years that does not believe the next generation is going to be better off than they are. And that anger is palpable. That anger, is Donald Trump. That anger is Brexit. That anger is kind of what you're seeing in Italy and what you're seeing in Brazil and some of the other places. That stuff is all over the world. It's not just the United States. We're kind of following you on that. And I think long term, we have to really grapple with that.
Sticking with the theme of kind of the European perspective and observations on the US, you called us that crazy little bunch over there doing crazy things people don't understand. One of the things that I do think is very hard to understand from outside the US are the idiosyncrasies of our election systems.
Yes.
Yeah. And the perception of its vulnerabilities to fraud. And if maybe you could unpick that a little bit for an international audience and also give us your take on whether or not, or how well do we think the election results will be accepted? What risks could we be seeing between November and January?
You're just asking me all the depressing questions. No, it's okay.
But you're answering them in such a lighthearted way, so
right.
it's entertaining.
So a couple things. One, we have the safest and most defined and defended electoral system in the world. The only person who doesn't seem to understand or believe that's Donald Trump. And even his own party, even his own people, there was no steal of the election. There was over 100 court cases afterwards. Not one of them was successful. There was no stealing of the election. That said, last night, in my opinion, incredibly underreported thing, Donald Trump said last night, I'm ahead in the polls, and the only way I can lose is if they steal it. Well, the only reason you would say those two things is if you think you could lose on Tuesday, and you're setting up the fight afterwards. And so, one of the things, now I'm trying very hard to stay retired from American politics. I'm co-chair of a bipartisan super PAC called Democracy Defenders. We did not know that democracy needed its own super PAC. But it is true, because in the past month, there's been 100 lawsuits filed in the battleground states about who can vote, how they can vote, what they have to show on election day, all of these things. I have two very depressing predictions. One, on Tuesday, we're likely to see some amount of discord, hopefully not violence, but discord at the polls, based on what the former president has told his people to go do. And to make sure, and there's, one of the biggest, in America, one of the best ways to predict politics is watch TikTok. And it's true, we build some of our models based on it. And last night, the #1 TikTok on the right was, the election was that foreign immigrants were voting in the election. Not true, no one's even alleged it, but it's now the #1 most believed thing on one side. So if you believe that, there could be real problems on election day. So that's what's going to happen. Two, we're not going to know who's going to win on election day. If you want to know, please tune in to NBC. I'll be on TV all night on election night, and I'll tell you what we're doing. But we're not going to know. And remember, last time Biden wasn't declared the winner until the Saturday. I think it'll be faster than that because some of the states have sped up their counting laws, but then we're going to be suing each other back and forth. If it's as close, if it really is a tied race, which I believe to my very bones that it is, the courts are going to have discussions for days, if not weeks, to get through this. And it's going to be really important for everyone to take a very deep breath and just understand that these things take time, and you have to go through it. Maybe that we will know very early. The one thing we won't know is who controls the House, because those elections are so close, and most of them are in California and New York, to non-battleground states, and it takes them forever to count their votes. So we won't know who wins control of the House for 2 or 3 weeks, which makes it very hard to figure out how you govern the country going forward.
One of the most perplexing things for me in such a polarized election that we have in the United States is the phenomenon of the perennially undecided voter.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the demographics in the US and support on the left, support on the right, who's undecided, and how are candidates approaching these various different groups?
Okay, this is my favorite question in the world. Thanks for asking. Everyone should buckle up, because this is pretty much my favorite thing to talk about in the world. Okay, so America is the most partisan country in the world. Only 6% of Americans were ever available to vote for Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. 47% of Americans had decided on the first day to vote for Trump. 47% of the Americans decided on the first day to vote for whichever Democratic candidate we've had in the past 6 months. And we fight over the 6%. It is really important to think about who those 6% are. They have an average of 2.8 jobs. They think about politics 4 minutes a week, and 60-some% of them are women, especially women with children, who have an average of a commute of over an hour a day and currently think the economy sucks. And in these 7 battleground states, their economic lives have gotten better because of inflation, worse because of inflation, because of COVID, because of a variety of things that neither party could control. And so they're trying really hard to make a decision about 2 things. And people forget it's really 2 decisions. One, are they going to vote? Because we have some of the lowest voter participation rates among all the Western democracies. In America, we think if you spend $4 billion on negative ads beating the hell out of each other, that will make people want to vote. Turns out it's not true. When I did Spanish politics for President Rajoy, I think we spent 30 million euros, and we had much higher turnout than the United States. We're going to spend $4 billion mostly on negative ads and have lower turnout. That being said, those people got to decide if they're going to vote, and then how they're going to vote. Traditionally, those 6% are totally economic voters. They're going to vote on the economy. If that is true, Donald Trump wins. However, these 6%, remember, 60-some% of them are women, and they're super upset about the abortion decision, not even because they're abortion advocates, because most of them are not. They just, unsurprisingly, don't want men telling them what to do. And so they have continually, since that decision, been very fervent to tell male politicians to go to hell. And so if that is true, then Kamala Harris will win. And so those are the 2 things. There's one other number that really moves the models all over the place, 2 more numbers. One is that which voters are more enthusiastic. That has been more predictive than anything else, including the economy. That number today, Kamala Harris has a 12% lead on. 87% of her voters say they're enthusiastic to vote for her, 75% of Trump's. I tweeted this out when you and I were having lunch and said to the American people on my Twitter account, this is the most important number, watch this. Because it really says who will vote. And if she pulls the upset and wins, it's only because of that number. So I think those are who those people are. And remember, of the 320 million Americans, only 7 states matter. The other 43 states have never heard from the presidential campaigns. They didn't see the candidates. It's just down to these 7 states. And they're spending $2 billion wailing away on each other in those 7 states. I went to one of the states last week, and I turned on the TV at night, and I counted 47 consecutive negative political ads on television. That is depressing. And you imagine being there and trying to go through that. The only people who want this election over more than Europeans are Americans.
All right, Jim, I'm not going to let you get off the stage without a personal conviction call. We've seen, I don't know if you're a betting man or not, but one of the statistics that I do follow are the betting odds on this, notwithstanding there's relatively limited liquidity in those, but they may be telling to some degree.
Yep.
And throughout the month of October, Trump has had a tremendous lead on all of the betting metrics that one might look at. But interestingly enough, just actually in the last 2 or 3 days since the weekend, the spread is starting to tighten. He was as high as, I think, 65%, 67% likelihood over the weekend. That's now down to 58, 60%, depending on what site you look at. Is that Puerto Rico? Is that the predominantly higher proportion of women who are showing up for early poll voting? Ultimately, my question is, what's your call, Jim, and what's going to make the difference?
So I'll tell you, I'll just non-disclose of my own trading, but I'm on those markets betting on her because I think if anyone thinks that he has a 58% chance to win, they're out of their fucking minds.
All right, it says it on the screen, unfortunately.
Thank you
with that
much.
closing comment, our time is up. We've got 5 days to the election. We're all going to be tuning into NBC News to watch you for that exciting evening. Thanks, everybody. It was a great conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.